should introduce Milen first. She runs our services groups that do a lot of work for all kinds of companies, implementing everything from guidelines to assessments to actually hands-on keyboards to fixing l10n issues and even doing some localization workflow technical work. We're not an LSP at Lingoport. In fact, when you think of Lingoport, think software and Lingoport go together. We're really focused on software development with our products and services. Anyway, enough about us. Really, the question is what are these guidelines? Why? I'm saying that really to set the table, so to speak, for the rest of the webinar. And that is that guidelines are a recipe for success. Kate, who sent out the really nice marketing webinars, marketing emails, really compared guidelines to a recipe. And I think that was pretty good analysis. She talked about creating a good beef bourguignon. But anyway, so the problem is that when you leave developers to kind of come up with how globalization is going to work within their code bases, you're going to get a lot of different solutions because there's a lot of different ways to get this done, and some of them are a lot better than others. So in terms of localization maturity within a software enterprise, guidelines really help you raise your game. You don't get a lot of different solutions that aren't optimal. Example, duplicate string IDs. We work with a very large company that has duplicate string IDs all over the place. That's crazy because, and the developer's pushing back that it's not a bug. So that's a lack of guidelines, and it has a real impact on the localization success of that organization down the line. If you have guidelines, you have a predictable process. You have predictable localization efficiency. It's just easier to maintain your localization from release to release, and you get better results, less onus on bugs, backlogs, testing. And with that, I'm going to leave it for Milen to talk because she has a lot of technical material. We probably will run a little over. We're going to do all the Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if you have questions, write them down, put them in the Q&A interface, and we'll have a look and go through them. All right, Milen, take it away.
Great, thanks for setting the stage. We do have quite a lot to cover. One is why you need guidelines, how it differs from other type of help you can find, and I'll give you also some examples of what our guideline reports look like and talk about benefits. So with that, let me get started. So creating software for international markets typically begins with a corporate decision that says our software X, whatever the software is called, is going to be released for international markets. And with that, that basically triggers the development and localization managers to tell their development teams that their code needs to be internationalized and needs to be ready for localization. And the reasons are, well, of course, you can't localize a software application without it being internationalized. So it's a prerequisite, really, because at minimum, you need to have the strings separated from the software code so that they go into resource files and they can be translated. But what we see more than that, or very frequently, is that internationalization is done to some extent, but it's not complete. And incomplete internationalization is really bad internationalization because it's going to create issues, bugs in the localized product. In fact, 50% of the bugs that are found in localized applications result from badly internationalized code. So knowing these two facts, dev and localization managers want to get the internationalization done. In fact, they want to get the internationalization done as early as possible, because the more you wait until internationalization is addressed, the more it costs the company. So if you wait until the product is localized and you do localization QA, then discover issues, going back and fixing them is going to be very costly. The best place to handle all of that is during building the product. So ideally during conception, if not during design and development, you want to write new code with a design and development that is going to support internationalization. So that's the push. With this push, development leads start looking at, okay, how are we going to internationalize our software? And if they are new to it, they will be realizing that there's actually a whole lot to do. This is not just about extracting the hard-coded strings. The strings should not be concatenated. There is the formatting that need to match the culture of the users in terms of number formatting, phone number formatting, currencies. Oh, there might be currency conversion, maybe time zone conversion. And it's not just formatting, it's also how users are going to be inputting their data. They're going to use their own local or cultural conventions as they enter it. Can you parse that? You might have email templates, design, things that get too big, too expanded. Oh, by the way, there is also how do you support all the different characters and so on. So it's quite a big list. And with that, organizations come to the point of, hey, we need some help. Let's get some instructions on best practices of how to do this. It's possible to find best practices on the internet. You can go and read a lot of different best practices out there, and typically these will be actionable items like extract all of your hard-coded text, put them in resource files, use Unicode, might be UTF-8, might be UCS, and pass a locale variable to date times, use this library, and so on. So these are generic best practices. They're useful, but it is still not specific to what a particular organization needs. Now, you could get this from us as well, we do it, but you could get very specific, customized best practices for your organization. Get an internationalization expert that's going to review your application, and they can give you best practices that are relevant to your application. But what it would still be missing is how these need to be implemented at code level by the software development team. In fact, the software development team, as they're trying to figure out how to implement that, will also realize that, oh, in order to solve some of these internationalization issues and apply the best practices, every layer of their application is affected. Just because internationalization allows for the software localization does not mean that you only need to worry about the presentation layer where the strings are. It affects the business logic, the persistence layer, and also other third-party applications. You might have like a third-party reporting tool or an invoicing tool. You might have one or more databases. Some of these might be relational or not, but you need to ensure that these third-party applications and every aspect of your architecture supports internationalization. And nowadays, when we look at a software application, there's so many different technologies or programming languages involved. In fact, my screen here doesn't have the most complex cases that we've seen. There are times where there are 30 different programming languages used together, including templating languages and scripts and so forth. So, okay, great. So how do I implement it in Vue.js or Nuxt or Rust, etc.? So next place developers go to is, hey, I can find these different tutorials of how to do ASP.NET internationalization or Python or Java. You can find these, they're helpful, that's great. If you have a mobile application, you want to know how to internationalize in Swift and Kotlin. Again, you can find all of that. It is still generic. These tutorials don't know about your application, and developers still need to use a lot of mental energy to be able to take the best practices as well as these tutorials and their architecture and come up with a solution. So it takes time. And developers in most organizations, if not all organizations that we're working with, have other things to do as well. They need to be developing other features. So under the pressure of developing the features as well as internationalization, what we typically see is that the features win. So internationalization bugs are kind of left there for them to come back and do it later on. Sometimes they just cannot get back to it fast enough because of deadlines and other things. So again, the bugs are found later on after localization, which means it's going to cost the company more. In short, we have found out that generic recommendations are just not as impactful as hoped. Instead, what has been helpful, and we have found that this makes organization much more successful to create good quality localized software, is to make sure internationalization really happens. And that means that the recommendations that are being put together should not be generic, they should be customized. So don't just say something like use Unicode or extract strings. You really need to show how to do it. And it needs to be specific to each of the technologies. It needs to be specific to their application. And all of this should be documented only for the type of issues that is really relevant to that application. For instance, if you are not going to be going into Arabic and Hebrew, just don't spend time documenting what it is you need to do for those locales. Once this documentation is specific and meaningful to that development organization, standardize on it. Make sure everybody uses the same standardization instead of figuring out their own solutions. And of course, our usual recommendations, we've mentioned this in other webinars as well, work with your developers, make sure they understand why internationalization is important, and keep measuring the success. One way to measure the success is to see if internationalization bugs are going down. And sometimes with some organization, what we have seen is that they can also follow which developer is doing better than another and award the good ones, the ones that have less issues. But what our webinar continues to focus here on is guideline. So these first three items. So let's talk a little bit more about how you can create these customized recommendations that are meaningful. This is our methodology for it. You can apply it as well. Basically, you should get your developers work together with internationalization experts. If you already have that expert in your team, you can have them start working on the internationalization and start building some solutions, test them. And once they work good, you can write guidelines that everybody can be standardized on. Where we get involved, what we see is organizations come to us because they don't have the necessary expertise or they don't have the bandwidth. So coming in and not knowing your particular application, we like to start with a discovery. We want to know what is the application is about so we can think about the type of internationalization issues that may happen. The discovery starts with a demo to understand the application, but then we move on to understanding the architecture, the design, what databases are there, maybe look at schemas, talk about what the different options are, document these if the development managers or product owners want to see the different options. We can document them, take a joint decision on these. And once that is agreed, the other part we agree on is just give us a small scope. Maybe this is a module of your application or a few screens, so that we can really live the life of an engineer in your team. Things are always a lot more complicated than you think. Once you start implementing the internationalization best practice for a particular programming language, you find out that there might be some legacy code or multiple layers within the application, and it gets pretty hairy. So it's really important to go through whatever an engineer or a developer on your team would be going through, fix those issues, make it work in a real case scenario, and then test it using pseudo localization testing, unit testing, and then document it. And once you have the documented guidelines, we can do custom trainings that are very, very specific and helpful to the developers. So what are guidelines? Guidelines are implemented and tested solutions for your specific code, your specific application that we would be standardizing on, you would be standardizing on. And again, they're very custom to a development team's reality and coding practices. This means that guidelines will include some strategies and best options so that they are jointly decided on. We'd like to get that part done ahead of time as we decide the decision. We call them the requirements document. This is what needs to happen. Here are the options. Options are taken together. But then the specific guidelines will have coding solutions for how to refactor your strings, how to deal with concatenations, pluralization, your email templates, etc. But it has to be per technology, per programming language. And in the process of doing that, we also show how the frameworks that were missing in your code, which we've created, are accessed. Because you might have, say, a templating framework, but it might not handle one aspect of internationalization. So we go and expand your framework so internationalization is supported. You might be using an internationalization library, but perhaps parsing is not covered. So we expand that library so that you have what you need, and we show then how it would be utilized. What's also really different in guidelines versus the generic tutorials you find is that we get to see how a development team is programming. What is their style? And developers are really sharp people that come up with very, very creative ways of getting the job done. And that might work really well in English, but oftentimes it's going to cause a problem with internationalization, which might require quite a lot of reworking of the application. It's better to find these early on again, rather than later. One example is, this is a more recent example that we've seen, is that the developer has utilized some strings and does some comparison with that string to see if it starts with this word. Well, the actual string is a hard-coded string. So if we say extract all your hard-coded strings, you would be extracting that, it gets translated. But now when the checks are done, it's no longer going to match ever, because what you're checking against is an English word and now it's translated. So the business logic is broken. So that was creative. The way they've done it works for English, but will not work for other languages. It has to be reworked. Another example is with databases. We have seen like some UI screens that have drop-down lists, and in the drop-down lists, user selects what kind of information they want to see, and that happens to be the label or the name of the column in the database. Great, those column names are written in English, but now when you translate, database content can be localized and translated, but not column names. So that means the whole logic needs to be reworked. And this is what we mean by guidelines. You need to be very specific rather than generic. So let's take a look at a few of our deliverables with the guidelines. This particular one, we're starting with a requirements report. So this is what we identify after the discovery meetings, where we look at the architecture, we ask questions, we see the demo. It's comprehensive because it does look at the architecture, it looks at how testing will be done, the database, and also some code level details. In some cases, we have even either provided some examples of UI screens and the type of issues that are found and what needs to be done as general requirements. For example, here, the calendar needs to be resolved. And in some other cases, we've done a lot of these. We might have like 25 screens that we went through, and we provide those as guidelines. I'm sorry, we provide these as requirements of what needs to happen. Also, as I've mentioned before, there might be options of different strategies that one can go with. We want to make sure that the development organization, the development managers, the product managers agree with the decision that is taken. So we like to document these, that they're well understood, and a joint decision is taken. Once the decisions are taken on the options, then we can go ahead and implement them. We implement them, we test them, as I've said before, and then when they're tested, we create a guideline report. Here's a first example of a guideline report. There are some different internationalization issues that are covered. If you take a look at these ones, it has a lot of different topics of issues that we have found. It reflects the scope that the customer wanted us to work on. So it was, a screen or a module, as I've said. But this particular customer said, we are already doing the strings okay. Actually, they happen to be a previous customer that we had done some other work on, so they had that quite under their belt, but they wanted more help with these issues. So guidelines are detailed internationalization recommendations, and they're customized, as I've said before. And if we take a look at this number formatting piece, we will see how that section, for instance, looks like. Every section will have an explanation of an issue, and then some code samples, snippets of code that are problematic per technology. This is how to do things in a JSON resource file or in a template, and then how they need to be replaced instead. So pre-internationalization and post-internationalization. We also like to show when it's tested how it looks like, and there will be some information on that. And here's a second example. This is for a different organization. They've had a lot of different types of technologies. This particular report is on the use of Vue.js with Nuxt. And everything that I've marked, even more of them, is all about strings. There are some other pages to the report as well, but the point that I want to make is that the statement of externalized strings is actually not as simple as you may think. And we want to make this easy for developers. If we only give them the statement, they have to figure all of this themselves. And again, they have competing deadlines, and it's hard to find the time for it. So we can figure all of this, test it, and provide it to them as standardized solutions. And once we have the guidelines, as I've mentioned before, we can do custom trainings. If you have Globalizer, then the training will include also the use of Globalizer in doing the internationalization. So in this particular case, Globalizer is going to be scanning the code to find internationalization issues. You click, well, the developer who's working in the IDE would have this kind of a screen. They will click on an issue. It will bring them to where the line of code is, and they will say, oh, okay, there's a problem here. How do I fix it? If they've done it before, they know how to do it. If not, they can look it up and apply it there. If you don't have Globalizer, well, once you find the issue yourself, you can still use the guideline report. So benefits of this approach, several benefits depending on which team you're in. If you're a developer, one of the benefits is that it's easy to fix internationalization issues. Once you find it, you can directly apply a prescribed fix that is in the guidelines. This means it's going to save mental energy, and therefore everything will be done a lot quicker. Developers will be able to move on to build new features, so it helps them with their deadlines. And as they're working on the new features, they are going to have less bug interruptions, meaning the QA department is not going to come and chase them and say, oh, now you need to go back in what you've been developing before because we found these issues, because they will have far less issues as they use standardized and tested solutions instead of them having to invent and create a different way that most likely won't be standardized and is more prone to error. And what this means for development managers is that, well, if developers are more productive, then it will be easier for development teams to meet their deadlines. There will be less interruptions, which means also less competition for the developer's time to work on features versus fixing bugs, which means less friction between development managers and localization teams, and there'll be less issues. Now, if you are in a localization team and you're a tester, you're going to like this because you're going to find less bugs because they've implemented tested standardized solutions. Less bugs means less regression, less following up with devs and to see if they fixed them and so forth. And for localization managers, shorter QA cycles will mean that localization releases are going to be easier to meet the deadline with, and the quality is going to be better. Again, better collaboration with dev teams, less competition for the time of the developers. And then what this means for the C-level or the organization as a whole is that internationalization bugs will not wait till the very end. They will be addressed from the beginning. So cost savings for the organization. Meeting deadlines means predictability with the global releases, and in general, the quality will be better with less bugs left to be fixed in a future release. There should be less bugs to begin with anyways, as we've said. So all in all, it reflects with a good reputation for the company. And several countries have legal requirements that the software needs to be in their language, so they will be able to meet that legal compliance and be able to globally release there as well. And with that, I have come to the end of our presentation, and we can open it up for Q&A. And I see I am on the dot at the half-an-hour mark. Adam, you want to?
All right, super. Yeah, I can read the questions if you like. So we have a few here. I'm going to start with the very first that what came in. We kind of addressed this, but at the same time, it bears repeating. is it really possible to have the same IATN settings across different development tools technologies? Like when we have integration of ASP.NET, Salesforce, MuleSoft, do they all have the same acceptability of IATN settings like language code and coding? How do we resolve this integration of multiple development technologies? And he clarified, or actually, sorry, it might not be he. I'm bad with Indian names. I am talking in terms of project having more than one technologies used for the same application product. And that more than one technology is the typical situation. It's not the exception. I would be really, the only time we ever see like one technology is maybe on the client side of like a device, like an IoT sort of thing, a little embedded device somewhere. But go ahead, you take the answer.
No, I mean, that's the entire point. There will be differences and you need to address them differently. But once you have looked at what every technology's needs are, you might be able to say, oh, all these things are the same. And you might maybe have some different levels of configuration. But there will be differences because different technologies also support internationalization to a different level. There might be, as mentioned, more missing frameworks in one versus the other. But you do want to have some common ground as to what type of issues to look for or what to support. But I would say take a look at them individually and then see if in some configuration, some areas are the same.
I'm going to add to that. What would you say to the localization team leader that supports not say, one critical application with multiple technologies, but lots of them? And maybe they can't do guidelines for every single application.
You can leverage across teams. If you have done one particular technology, that could be leveraged to another one. However, you do need to review first what the other application is doing, because application A might not have, say, a sort feature, but application B does. So you want to make sure that you bring what's maybe was not covered before.
Okay, so in other words, hey, we have a lot of JavaScript in use, leaving out the whether they're using Next or Vue or React or whatever. We have a lot of JavaScript in use. Here's how to handle globalization for JavaScript, and then clone that for the various organizations.
Yes, but make sure you do this discovery part.
Right.
First. Yes.
Okay, great.
Because you might need to amend it.
Great.
So you
great.
can leverage, but just don't assume that it's a cookie cutter fix.
Okay, great. Yeah. This is very nice. I really like the webinar so far. Really useful. Yeah, Milen. The only concern I have is that there's an assumption that there'll always be an English team available for l10n. I agree on the customized recommendations, but how do you deal with the different teams wanting or not wanting, rather, to implement such a suggestion? Okay, resistance. As you said, when features are the focus for many teams, IATN, l10n is an afterthought. And when teams are focused on their daily tasks and KPIs, it's difficult to find engineering support for localization tests and improvement because things work okay, no need to change, especially when localization managers are not engineers themselves. Oh man, this is like the siren song of difficulty in our industry. Go ahead, I'll let you answer.
So if the issue, I'm not sure if I get the main point of the question. Let me be clear on that.
So different teams, how do you get them to want to do this? Want to take the suggestions when they have so much other stuff.
Yes, and that actually goes to the one slide I had with generic recommendations don't work. And I focused more on the guideline aspect, but what is really important is we had like item number 4 and 5. You have to work with your developers. You need to keep explaining to them as to why the internationalization is important. And then the refreshing of the message. That can be done by getting some measurements. Measurements could be maybe how many bugs go into Jira. Look, this team is doing better than your team. So awarding sometimes at the development level, saying, hey, this is our champion. Bob is always creating such good internationalization code. You can award them. Some organization don't just go with an award, but basically measuring is very important. In our case, we use Globalizer because with Globalizer, we can also see how many issues exist. We give the developer the chance for them to fix it, but also managers get to see, and I didn't get into all of this in my presentation, but they get to see also a dashboard of how things are going, are issues resolved. Is one part of the organization or a team doing worse than another? So train them again, recommunicate, award. I don't know if I've answered the question, but
no, you did a really good job. I'm going to just mention, if you go into the, well, I don't think it's on the blog, on Vimeo, if you search on our Lingoport channel, there was a presentation that Lucio led from Workday, Lucio Gutierrez, and he was writing like the session he gave was like, you can't fix what you can't see. We also have an EBAT book out with similar name.
But I actually I just had one more thought. I wanted to reiterate why with these guidelines that are customized, we want to have engineers become an engineer on your application, to breathe and live the life of an engineer on your team, dealing with those technology combinations and the legacy code and whatnot. And as I said before, reality is harder usually than like generic recommendations, because if and when that engineer can get all this implemented in your code and tested, that provides a lot of trust by the other engineers. That's why we have this onboarding. We had an onboarding step. We want to know what your processes are, your development environment, how you do your builds and whatnot. Yeah, so if I can sit side by side to you, do your life, but internationalize and fix the code, that brings the trust. And developers don't really want to take recommendations from people they don't trust, that are not that technical. And I think part of the success with these customized development is not only that they're customized, but it is that they have been your colleague. They actually live and breathe the same reality that you do.
Great, great. So what I was saying is that Lucio gives a presentation on getting the measurement and across a very large enterprise. So if you can find that on Vimeo, just look for the Lingoport channel and it should be there. We don't have it posted to our site yet. And it's like me with an iPhone recording it. So I don't guarantee the steadiness of the recording, but it came out, it's worth your while. The next question I really like, oh, one more thing. One of the cool things, I shouldn't sell, but Globalizer has the option of showing the developer an l10n issue automatically during like a commit or a pull request. And that's pretty effective because they're actually used to those kind of metrics and saying, oh, you know, like tools like that actually helping them with coding quality. And that can really sort of help boost awareness. because it's like their day-to-day work when they save or when they commit the work. They're saying, hey, here it is for review. All right. What do you recommend when you work with, actually, I want to get to this question here. Do you have a suggestion for unifying the approach also with designers?
Definitely. Yes. As one of the other participants posed in their question, localization tends to be an afterthought. And with that, it means internationalization is an afterthought. We want to do it early on. The earlier the better. At the time of designing the application is the perfect time to bring in all of the requirements. So definitely our architects and internationalization experts would love to actually be involved at that point. And what would be discussed is, okay, what is this application? Again, a discovery. Which are your initial tier 1 markets? Because there might be, we want to know tier 1, tier 2, everything for best practices, so that it is well set for everything. But reality is there are going to be some deadlines that come before. So that will help prioritize also the type of issues that need to be solved. It would be so much easier if we can look at the databases, the code design, the UI screen designs early on. You want to design your screens with enough space for the translations, the buttons. We did a different webinar also on Figma. So if your designers are creating these screens, that's a perfect time to look at how will this work with other languages, and bring those that feedback early on. And then, of course, there's going to be less expansion, or let's shorten the translation kind of problems that many applications see. Once it's translated, things don't fit on a button. It's too crowded, or the design needs to be done a little differently. Sometimes in actually the screen designs, we even see that there's concatenations happening there. The screen is designed with some text. It looks really pretty. Part of the English string is here, and below it will be this in maybe a smaller font, and then this with a even smaller, it's a sentence. Well, now you've broken it up in your design in 3 different segments, which reads okay in English, but it's not going to read in another language. So we can take a look at that as well, and make recommendations there.
By the way, I want to get through all these questions. So we are running over the time, but I really like to finish all the questions rather than cut the webinar short. Quick tip, go to lingoport.com and then the blog, and there's a little search window. Just type in Figma and you'll find all kinds of information about during the design phase. Use Figma. Like, I know not everybody uses Figma, but an awful lot of people do. There's a Figma plugin to our tools too. All right. What do you recommend when you work with different external development teams, each with their own practices? I think we've gone over some of this. Do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, different development teams have different creative ways of writing, so they should be looked at. Again, you can always leverage from other teams, but it's good to take a look at what they do as well.
Okay. What l10n recommendation would you give a company that runs a lot of experiments in EN, being English, with localization happening after the experiment proves to be successful? And I can tell by this person's spelling of localization, they're not in the US. Cool.
All right. Well, one easy recommendation is about pseudo-localization. It's still in English, but you can pseudo-localize and see what the application will look like. I might actually have an extra screen in here for that. I think I do. Yes. So this is what pseudo-localization is. You take your English text, but you change the you change the English text by putting some accents. You expand the string. You make it longer because when you go from English to another language, there are some languages, especially like a German word or a Spanish text or sentence gets longer. So you add the expansion based on some heuristics of what that expansion should be, and also add some more difficult characters to display. Asian characters are added here. So it's basically, it's not a real translation, it's a fake translation that stress tests the internationalization aspects. And when you look at that screen, there is some quick information you can gain from it. If you have some text left on your screen that is not marked up with these accents, it means this was not extracted. There is still hard-coded strings left in the code. So the developer needs to go and fix them. This second one, if you can see, we also put like, by the way, this is like an automated tool that developers can use. I talked about Globalizer before. We also have Localizer and Globalizer, but with both of them, you can do some sort of localization. You want developers to be able to see this before they commit their code. So if there is like a close square bracket and an open one, this means that these were two different strings that are concatenated. And it's not going to work for other languages because of word ordering and grammatical differences. This would need to be fixed. This obviously shows you an encoding or font issue. You don't see a closed bracket. That means it doesn't fit on the button. It's truncated. And this one is good. So again, you don't want to wait until the very end to localize it. Provide pseudo localization to the developers so that when they think they're done, they haven't found any more issues, but they can also do this. It could also be done at the end of a localization, at the end of an internationalization phase, right when you think you're ready to go to localization, you could run this one more time so that when it goes to localization, everything has been fixed. Adam, anything you want to add?
Well, this is just a really good way to get the QA team on your side also, because it's something they can demonstratively test and measure and file. So you can get both the developers, the designers, because this sort of thing can be done for Figma. You can get the developers to be aware of this so that they run their unit tests and the like. They see what their stuff looks like and they sort of know what this is. And then finally, the testers who really are the, like that last gatekeeper for what they're doing. It's simple, but it works really well. And, it's integrated into our stuff. You wouldn't have to buy our stuff to get this. There's other ways, but it does make it really easy because it becomes all integrated with a CI/CD. So it's all automatically, nobody has to remember to do it. All right. Got a nice kudos. This is very helpful. Thank you, Milen and Todd. But my name's Adam, not Todd. You may have met Todd, so that's great. There was one last question, which I typed a clarifying thing, and it stopped showing up in the open questions area. It was, how can we ensure repeated l10n is not taking place? I wonder if they meant is taking place, but it's sort of the same thing. I'm going to answer that really quickly, and then you can add to it. When you run pseudo localization, does it break? That's a very high level because it's really just what you see on the top surface for the for the user interface. So it's not complete. I know one of the things that I really like about how Globalizer works is it's running on the code level. So you see stuff that you might not catch in testing, likely wouldn't catch in testing, all kinds of compares and software operations that just, it's really hard to have that show up until like, it gets out there, it's localized and all that. So Globalizer scanning on the code basis and keeping track of, helping the developers keep track of the work that they're doing, but it also shows up in dashboards. So like no developer wants that little red alert thing next to the code that they worked on. So it tends to sort of be a less hit somebody on the head with a bug list type of way of doing things. And anything else to add, Milen?
No, that's it. I guess we should also let people know that these slides are going to be available to them.
Mm-hmm. Right, and the recording will be as well. There's nothing you have to do. We'll send it. We're whittled down to the last diehards that are staying on with all the questions. There's 24 of you. So thank you for sticking with us. All right, Milen, this was really great. You got some kudos as well coming in through Zoom. Really great job. And thank you. We're still putting together what our next webinar will be. If you go to lingoport.com, also there's a really great new ebook about finding IETN issues that across your organization that might really be helpful for many of you. So I welcome you. It's free. Just go ahead and sign up and download it. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Milen, I'm going to stop recording.